Unity. Hello again. Thank you for being here with me once more. I hope you are very well today. I am Marie. Welcome to my channel. This information can be seen as science fiction, or as the viewer sees best, and I post it for entertainment purposes only. Still, I take my information very seriously, and for whoever has eyes to see. I am writing this on the morning of October 27th, 2024. As I see things, there are no densities, dimensions, timelines, alternate realities, parallel universes, multiverse, existential realms, existential planes, astral worlds, or material realms. There is no beginning and no end to the universe, no creation, and no time as an independent factor or entity, and so on. And there is no universe either, but I needed to use a word. They are all constructs of a mind, which turns to pigeonhole and dissect everything into smaller, more digestible, more understandable bits. All the classifications I mentioned above are nothing more than a mirror of the consciousness who thought them. What defines them, their characteristics and limits, and the differences between one and another are purely arbitrary, and based on all kinds of equally arbitrary justifications and logical arguments, which are also a reflection of who is thinking and using them, and the limited skill of their minds. As is to be expected, one of the most used justifications, which is also wielded as a weapon to impose the ideas and therefore the interests of those who are holding it, is science. It is used more to discredit alternate ways of thinking, and of approaching understanding reality from another non-scientific point of view. An example of this would be emotions, which are immediately discredited, and taken as if they had no wisdom and logic of their own. Emotions are not as arbitrary as they want people to think, as they also obey an elaborate pattern with complex logic, which means that they hold wisdom of their own, yet obey thought and energy flow patterns which are completely ignored and belittled by those who turn science into yet another dogmatic religion. Perhaps this is proof that the creatures who are ultimately controlling Earth are emotionless, and therefore, not human Lyrian. Each creature with a soul, and each soul without a creature, will interpret its reality only through the lens of its own understanding and level of consciousness awareness. It will include all the subdivisions and definitions of illusory different parts of existence, also in an attempt to describe and therefore understand the external reality it is experiencing, mostly unaware that it is only experiencing itself in the process. And even such a soul, and every other one as well, is defined and created with an arbitrary set of boundaries and limits, which set it, and them, apart from another, and from the rest of existence, from everything that exists, even though this is also another creation of the mind. Each individual soul is nothing other than a set of pet definitions and ideas, which were developed after a progressive line of events and experiences attributed to it in particular, and not to another soul. A soul would be created as the result of an accumulation of experiences which enrich it as it goes along experiencing itself, in its own particular timeline it also created for itself, by the mere fact of being conscious and self-aware. Therefore, time can only be an illusory sub-product of a consciousness experiencing itself as something other than its own ideas that have defined it apart from what it considers to be everything else. A soul is source creating a character with limits for itself, in an attempt for more expansion. And a soul's ego self is no other than the attachments source has generated to define one soul from another, which it also created, like a writer developing complex personality traits for each one of the characters of his, or her novel. All those characters in a novel end up being the personalization of different character traits of the writer itself. You can see the writer's deepest and most complex unconscious, reflected onto each one of the novel's characters, because as he or she created and defined how each and all of them should be, all the novel's characters are the writer. Their consciousness, personality, actions, and free will are illusory, and only valid within the context of the novel and how it is unfolding, because as seen from higher above, it is only one person, one soul who is controlling them all, and it is the writer and his or her imagination. In the exact same way, all souls are nothing other than characters of Source itself, and they are held together by its ideas and the attachments it developed to each character, which are only a reflection of its own attributes. You can see then that all the definitions created to understand the greater reality, such as densities, dimensions, existential realms, timelines, and so on, are only attempts of a soul to understand itself, within the limited parameters and awareness level it holds. And as its consciousness awareness is limited, it can only describe itself within those limits, and any attempt to describe its illusory outside world can only be valid for that soul, or for those at its same level of conscious awareness, but not necessarily for others. Those like-minded souls only decide what and how their reality should be defined because of their perception agreements, and end up validating one another into thinking that their idea of reality is the correct one, and given some power, they will impose that point of view upon others who could have different perception capacity, and therefore interpret reality differently. Again, reality and truth are only imposed by those who hold the most power. All densities, dimensions, existential realms, alternate realities, timelines, and so on, are only definitions created by those who have had enough power to have them set as truth, but can only be valid from the limited point of view of those who created and defined them. The limits of those subdivisions of reality are, therefore, not valid for everyone, as they depend on different awareness and perception capacities and levels. Take for example the so-called material world, or the world of the living, which is more or less the same thing. This is easy to understand for Lyrian humans, who are mostly locked into the reality their biological senses impose on them, in a strongly materialistic manner, and ignore the astral and other existential levels. The world of the living is easily distinguishable from the spirit world, as what defines each one is quite clear to them. But it is not for the Irma, for example, who have a much broader perception range, and therefore their reality is much more expanded, as it includes many parts of the astral, of the spirit world, which is well within the range of their biological senses, and therefore they take those perceptible parts of the spirit world as an undeniable chunk of their reality, and with which they must also interact every day. The perceivable, hard, scientifically provable reality of human Lyrians does not coincide with the one of the Irma, who are much more spiritual and much more mystical beings. Most human Lyrians simply do not have the awareness consciousness level which is necessary to even start to comprehend the Irma, as Lyrians may only see feline rituals being performed, when for the cats, they are interacting and managing things, and beings, many of their own kind, but in the spirit world. Even the very word, ritual, ends up being reductionist, and even insulting to the Irma, as what they are doing is far more expanded and elaborate, and such a word is also heavily associated with evil things, therefore ritual is not something applicable to anything Irma do. Each soul, and each group of souls, which can also be defined as a biological species when they have a body, will have their own perception, and awareness which they will use to define what reality is to them. As you develop higher and higher consciousness awareness levels, you tend to see everything more and more connected, you no longer see barriers, yet you still understand why they may be there, yet you can see how arbitrary those are. As the Irma, there are other beings and creatures who by their own right have developed their very particular way of defining their reality, and it may or may not coincide with our definitions, or only partially, as Lyrian humans only somewhat coincide with those of the Irma. Densities, dimensions, parallel realities, timelines, existential realms, and so on, are only Earth human interpretations of reality, which do not include the perception and the ideas of reality of other Lyrians, much less those of other species. They may have some very limited validity to them from one or another point of view, and they are purely only valid on Earth. They are far from being universally valid, and they are reflections of how limited the average human mind on Earth is. An example of this is their inability to understand and accept concepts like no time, of something not having a beginning nor an end, and so on. In my point of view, there cannot be anything other than the total unity of source. Everything is connected as one mass, where what defines one thing from another are only ideas, which cannot always be valid. There is only oneness, even though that word is not enough either, as to be able to even understand the concept of oneness you must hold in mind the opposite. Therefore we are still thinking in terms of duality, of something being different from something else. Source itself is above oneness, however incomprehensible this may be to us all. This will be all for today. As always, thank you for watching my video, and for liking, sharing, and subscribing for more. It helps this channel grow a lot. And I hope to see you here next time. With much love and appreciation, your friend, Marie Swaruu.